Have you ever noticed that there is a voice in your head that never seems to stop? A voice that comments on everything. It judges what you say. It replays things you did hours ago. It predicts what might go wrong tomorrow. Sometimes it sounds cautious. Sometimes it sounds anxious. And sometimes it sounds brutally critical. Most of us assume this voice is who we are. After all, it speaks in the first person. I should have done better. I'm not ready yet. What if everything goes wrong? But here is a strange question. What if that voice isn't really you? What if it's something you learned? A collection of fears, expectations, and old conditioning that slowly became the narrator of your life. Psychology sometimes calls this the inner critic. Philosophy has given it many other names: the ego, the conditioned mind, the voice of survival. But regardless of the label, the effect is the same. It fills the mind with constant noise, and the more we listen to it, the harder it becomes to hear something else. A quieter voice, a calmer one, a voice that does not shout, panic, or judge. A voice that simply observes. The strange part is this: that silent voice might actually be closer to who you really are, and learning to tell the difference between these two voices may be one of the most important skills a human being can develop. After a while, this voice becomes so familiar that we stop questioning it. It wakes up with us in the morning. Before the day even begins, it's already talking, reminding us of everything that could go wrong, everything we didn't finish yesterday, everything we might fail at tomorrow. Throughout the day, it follows quietly in the background, commenting, comparing, evaluating. You scroll through your phone and suddenly it whispers, "Everyone else seems to be doing better." You make a small mistake and it immediately says, "You should have known better." You hesitate before trying something new and it warns you, "What if you embarrass yourself?" Over time, something subtle happens. We stop hearing this voice as a voice. We start hearing it as reality. Its judgments begin to feel like facts. Its fears begin to feel like intuition. Its constant commentary begins to feel like the truth about who we are. But in many cases, this voice is not wisdom. It is conditioning, fragments of past experiences, old criticisms absorbed from parents, teachers, or society. A mental pattern designed by the brain to predict danger and avoid rejection. From a psychological perspective, this mechanism once had a purpose. Our ancestors survived by constantly scanning for threats. The brain evolved to anticipate problems before they appeared. But in the modern world, this system often goes into overdrive. Instead of protecting us from danger, it begins protecting us from life itself, from risks, from vulnerability. And the more we listen to it without question, the smaller our world slowly becomes. Not because reality is limiting us, but because the voice inside our head is quietly narrowing what we believe is possible. To understand this voice more clearly, we need to look at what modern neuroscience has discovered about the mind. For a long time, scientists believed the brain was mostly active only when we were focused on a task. Thinking, solving problems, making decisions. But brain scans revealed something surprising. Even when a person is doing absolutely nothing, the brain remains incredibly active. In fact, there is an entire network of brain regions that turns on when the mind is at rest. Neuroscientists call it the default mode network. Instead of focusing on the outside world, this network turns attention inward. It begins reflecting, remembering the past, imagining the future, replaying conversations, and most importantly, constructing a narrative about who we are. This network is responsible for what psychologists call the narrative self, the story we constantly tell ourselves about our identity. I am this kind of person. I always fail at things like this. I'm not confident enough. These thoughts feel personal and deeply true, but from the brain's perspective, they are simply mental constructions, patterns formed from memory, experience, and prediction. Another important distinction emerges here. Not all thoughts are created intentionally. Some thoughts are deliberate. You choose them. You analyze a problem. You plan a strategy. But many thoughts are automatic. They appear suddenly, without invitation, without effort, and often without accuracy. The brain generates them constantly, as part of its attempt to interpret reality. But interpretation is not the same as truth. The mind is not only a perceiver, it is also a storyteller. And sometimes the story it tells about you is incomplete, distorted, or simply outdated. The challenge is that the brain does not clearly label these stories as stories. It presents them as facts, which means that if we never question them, we begin living inside a narrative that was written by habit rather than awareness. And that narrative slowly becomes the voice we believe is ourselves. Long before modern neuroscience began studying the mind, ancient philosophical traditions were already exploring the nature of this inner voice. In Buddhism, it is often described as the illusion of a fixed self, a constantly changing stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensations that we mistakenly identify as me. The Stoic philosophers approach the problem differently. They believe that many of our mental disturbances come from confusing our judgments with reality. A thought appears, and we immediately believe it, without questioning whether it is true or simply a reaction. In the Vedanta tradition of ancient India, this distinction becomes even clearer. They describe the mind as a tool, a powerful instrument for perception and interpretation, but not the essence of who we are. According to this perspective, the true self is not the voice speaking in the mind. It is the awareness that hears the voice, the quiet presence that notices thoughts appearing and disappearing. To understand this more easily, many teachers use a simple metaphor. Imagine the mind as the sky. Thoughts are like clouds passing through it. Some clouds are light and brief. Others are dark and heavy. Some storms may fill the entire horizon. But no matter how intense the clouds become, they never actually damage the sky itself. The sky remains open, unchanged. In the same way, thoughts may appear in the mind: worry, doubt, judgment, fear. But the awareness that observes these thoughts remains separate from them. The problem begins when we forget this distinction. Instead of seeing thoughts as clouds passing through the sky, we begin to believe that we are the storm. And when that happens, every passing thought begins to feel like a permanent truth about who we are. But the moment we step back and observe the mind itself, something subtle changes. The clouds are still there, but the sky becomes visible again. Once you understand that multiple mental voices can exist inside the mind, a new question naturally appears. How do you know which voice is speaking? How do you distinguish the voice of fear from the voice of genuine intuition? The first clue lies in the emotional tone. The voice of the ego almost always carries tension. It speaks in the language of urgency. Hurry. You're falling behind. You need to fix this immediately. It often compares you to others. It judges. It repeats the same thoughts again and again, like a loop that refuses to stop playing. This voice is not necessarily malicious. It evolved to protect you from potential danger. But in modern life, it often becomes overly cautious. It tries to control uncertainty, avoid embarrassment, prevent rejection. The result is a constant sense of pressure. The voice of intuition feels very different. It rarely shouts. It does not rush you. It does not shame you. Instead, it feels quiet, clear, simple, almost like a gentle observation rather than a command. Intuition tends to appear in moments of stillness, a sudden clarity, a calm sense that something is right or not right, without dramatic explanations. Another key difference is repetition. The ego voice repeats the same worry endlessly. Intuition usually appears once, calmly, and then disappears. It does not try to convince you. It simply presents a signal. If you want to begin noticing this difference, there is a simple exercise you can try. The next time a strong thought appears in your mind, pause for a moment. Take one slow breath and ask yourself a simple question. Is this voice trying to scare me or guide me? You may be surprised how quickly the tone reveals the answer. Because fear tends to shout, but truth usually speaks very quietly. Once you begin to recognize that not every thought represents your true voice, another possibility opens. You no longer need to fight every thought that appears. In fact, trying to suppress thoughts often makes them louder. The mind is similar to water. The more you try to force it to become still, the more turbulence you create. But something different happens when you simply observe. Instead of reacting to each thought, you allow it to appear and then pass, like clouds drifting across the sky. This practice is sometimes called observing the mind. You become a witness, the quiet presence behind the thoughts. When a thought appears, instead of arguing with it, you simply notice it. There is worry, there is judgment, there is fear. You don't say, "I am worried." You notice that worry is appearing. That small shift changes everything. Because the moment you observe a thought, you step outside of it. The thought may still exist, but it no longer controls you in the same way. Silence also plays an important role in this process. The constant noise of modern life makes it difficult to hear anything subtle inside the mind. But when moments of quiet appear, awareness becomes clearer. This does not require hours of meditation. You can begin with something very simple. For the next 2 minutes, try a small experiment. Sit comfortably. Take one slow breath, and then simply watch your thoughts as if they were clouds passing through the sky. Do not chase them. Do not resist them. Just observe. Notice how they appear. Notice how they disappear. And notice something even more interesting. There is a part of you that remains still while all of this is happening. That silent presence is much closer to who you truly are than any voice in your mind. For most of our lives, we assume that every voice inside our mind belongs to us. Every criticism, every fear, every anxious prediction about the future. But once you begin observing your thoughts, something surprising starts to happen. You notice that many of those voices are simply echoes. Echoes of past experiences. Echoes of expectations. Echoes of fears that were learned long ago. They speak loudly. They repeat themselves. And because they sound familiar, we assume they must be who we are. But the moment you pause and simply observe the mind, a small distance appears. And in that space, clarity begins to emerge. You start to notice something important. The loudest voice in your mind is not always the wisest one. In fact, the voice that truly guides you, is often the quietest. It does not demand, it does not rush. It simply appears as a subtle sense of knowing. And the more you learn to listen to that silence, the less power the anxious voice begins to have, because you start to see it clearly for what it really is. Just another passing thought, not your identity, not your truth. Just a moment in the movement of the mind. And perhaps the most important realization is this: you are not the voice. You are the one who hears it. And once you truly understand that, a different kind of freedom becomes possible. A freedom where thoughts can appear without controlling who you are. A freedom where silence is no longer empty, but full of clarity. So now I'm curious about something. Which of these two voices has been speaking louder in your life lately? The anxious voice that constantly criticizes and worries, or the quiet voice that appears when the mind finally becomes still? Let me know in the comments. And if this idea resonated with you, you may want to explore something even deeper next. There is another paradox of the mind that changes the way we relate to life itself. It's called the paradox of detachment. And once you understand it, many things that once felt heavy suddenly become lighter.